3-day-old tracks in the snow, a burned-out trading post, 2 families gone, including 4 children, the youngest not even a year old. And the only person alive who can read those tracks is a 22-year-old woman kneeling in the cold, while a cowboy behind her is carrying a secret that could get them both killed. He's not just chasing outlaws, he's chasing the man who shot his brother in the back and left him to die in the street. Now these 2 strangers are about to ride into the deadliest stretch of the Rocky Mountains in the middle of winter. Just the 2 of them against 5 armed killers. No badge, no backup, no guarantee they'll make it back alive. But what happens between them on that frozen trail? That's the part of this story you'll never forget. Because sometimes, the person you've been looking for your whole life shows up in the last place you'd ever expect, right at the edge of everything you might lose. You're listening to Westwind Tales, the channel where the Old West comes alive through stories of frontier courage, deep love born under open skies, the bonds between parents and children, and the quiet, powerful compassion that connects one soul to another, even in the wildest of places. This story is a reminder that the greatest partnerships aren't born in comfort. They're forged in fire, built on trust, and held together by 2 people who see each other clearly and choose to ride side by side anyway. If that's the kind of story that speaks to your heart, stay with us all the way to the end. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a new tale from the trail. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever taken a chance on someone and had it change your whole life? And if you know someone who needs to hear this story tonight, go ahead and share it with them. Now, settle in. This ride is just getting started.
Now, the tracks in the snow were 3 days old, but Helena Cross could read them better than most folks read the morning paper. The story they told sent a chill clean through her, one that had nothing to do with the December wind howling across the Colorado mountainside. She hunkered down low, her buckskin coat dusted with fresh powder, studying the prints that led away from the burned-out trading post. 2 families had made a life there, right up until someone decided they shouldn't anymore. Her breath plumed in white clouds as she traced the edge of a boot print with a gloved finger. She noted the peculiar wear on the left heel, the little drag that spoke of a limp or an old injury. The depth told her the man weighed close to 200 pounds and was carrying a heavy load. "What are you seeing?" The voice behind her was deep and cautious. Helena did not need to turn to know Pierce Northwood was off his horse and walking toward her with that measured stride of his, the one that said he was ready for trouble but hoping not to find it. She had been tracking for his outfit for 3 weeks now, ever since she rode into Central City looking for a job and found the tall cowboy. He had been standing outside the marshal's office staring at a wanted poster with a look that said it was personal. 5 men, she said, rising and brushing the snow from her knees. The one out front is the leader. He is walking confident, not looking over his shoulder to check on his men. The others are following in a loose bunch, which tells me they are not army men, not organized beyond a common greed. They are heading northeast toward the high country. That is a fool's path in this weather unless they know a way through that we do not. Pierce stepped up next to her, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him in the frigid air. Together they looked out over the vast white wilderness of the Rocky Mountains in winter. The year was 1885, and this part of Colorado was still wild enough for a man to just disappear. That is exactly what these men were counting on. The problem for them was Helena Cross had been reading trails since she was old enough to walk, taught by her Shoshone mother and her trapper father. She had never lost a trail, no matter how cold or how dangerous it got. "We ought to turn back," Pierce said, but his voice did not have much conviction. "The others are waiting in Central City. We could gather more men, get more supplies. Come back in the spring when the passes are clear." Helena turned to really look at him then. She took in the strong lines of his face, the worry creasing his brow, and the way his hand rested on his gun belt more from habit than threat. He was maybe 25 to her 22, with sandy brown hair that curled at his collar and shoulders broad enough to make a woman feel protected without feeling small. She had liked that about him from the start, the way he respected her skills. He never questioned her abilities just because she wore skirts and braided her dark hair down her back. "Those families had children," she said quietly. "The Hutchinsons had a baby girl not even a year old. The Prescotts had 3 boys. The oldest was 9. If there is any chance they survived, any chance at all that those men took them instead of killing them, then we cannot wait for spring." Something in Pierce's expression changed. His resolve hardened in a way that told her he had been hoping she would say exactly that. He had been testing himself more than he had been testing her. He gave one sharp, decisive nod, and when he spoke again, his voice was like iron. "Then we ride. But Helena, I need you to understand something. These men we are tracking, they are part of Jacob Steele's gang. Jacob Steele is the reason I came to Colorado in the first place. He killed my brother last year in Wyoming. He shot him in the back during a bank robbery and left him bleeding in the street. I have been hunting him ever since." The confession hung between them in the cold air, heavy and honest. Helena felt something shift in her own chest, a recognition of shared pain. She reached out and touched his arm for just a moment, feeling the solid strength of him through the layers of wool and leather. "Then we have 2 reasons to catch them," she said. "Justice for your brother, and hope for those children. But Pierce, if we do this, if we head into the high country in the dead of winter with just the 2 of us, we are putting our lives in each other's hands. You will have to trust me completely. And I will have to trust you the same." He met her eyes, and in his gaze she saw something that made her pulse quicken. Something beyond a simple partnership. "I already trust you," he said. "You can track better than any scout I've ever known. Better than the men the Army hired when I was ranging down in Texas. Better than the old mountain men who have been reading trails for 50 years. From the moment I saw you studying those prints outside the marshal's office, I knew you were the one who could help me find Steele. So I am asking you now, Helena Cross, will you ride with me this winter? Will you help me track these men through snow and storm, knowing it might kill us both, knowing we might never make it back to civilization before the worst of the season hits?" The smart answer was no. The sensible answer was to return to Central City, to wait for spring, to let the marshal gather a proper posse with proper supplies. But Helena had never been particularly sensible. And something in Pierce's voice, in the way he was looking at her like she was the answer to a prayer he had been too proud to pray, made her decision easy. "I will ride with you," she said. "This winter and however long it takes, but we do it my way. We track smart. We stay ahead of the weather, and we do not take unnecessary risks. Those men might be killers, but they are not worth dying for if we can avoid it." Pierce smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish, and he held out his hand. Helena took it, feeling the strength of his grip through both their gloves. They shook on it like business partners, like equals, like 2 people who were about to walk into hell together and were determined to walk right back out. They rode hard for the rest of that day, following the tracks as they wound through pine forests heavy with snow, across frozen streams that required careful navigation, and up slopes that made the horses blow and strain. Pierce had a good horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Ranger, that had the look of a cow pony bred for endurance. Helena rode her own mount, a tough little paint mare called Storm, who had carried her across half the Western Territories without complaint. The 2 horses seemed to get along well enough. They fell into an easy rhythm as they climbed higher into the mountains. As the light began to fail, painting the snow in shades of blue and purple, Helena found them a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of rock, where the wind could not reach, and the snow had not drifted too deep. Pierce gathered wood while she tended the horses, rubbing them down and covering them with blankets, making sure they had enough dried grass from the supplies they carried. By the time he had a small fire going, carefully positioned so the smoke would break up against the rock face and not give away their position, full darkness had fallen. The temperature was dropping fast. They ate a simple meal of hardtack and jerky and coffee so strong it could wake the dead. They did not talk much because sound carried in the mountains, and they could not afford to be careless. But Helena found herself powerfully aware of Pierce's presence across the fire from her. The way the flames cast shadows across his face, the way he moved with efficient grace, even in the confines of their small shelter. She had traveled with men before, had worked alongside trackers and hunters, and cowboys, but there was something different about Pierce Northwood, something that made her hyper-aware of every glance, every accidental brush of hands when they both reached for the coffee pot. "Tell me about your family," he said finally, his voice low and rough from the cold. "You said your mother was Shoshone. Is she the one who taught you to track?" Helena wrapped her hands around her tin cup, grateful for the warmth, and let herself think about her mother for the first time in months. "She was Shoshone. Yes. She died when I was 16. A fever took her one winter when we were camped near the Green River. But before that, she taught me everything she knew about reading the land, about understanding the language of tracks and signs. My father was a French trapper who had come west in the 30s before the big beaver decline. He taught me to shoot, to skin game, to survive in the wilderness. Between the two of them, I learned to be self-sufficient." "And your father?" Pierce asked gently. "Is he still alive?" Helena shook her head. "He died 2 years ago. His heart just gave out one night. I buried him in the mountains he loved, and after that I just started wandering. I have been a tracker, a guide, and a scout for folks heading west. I have done about anything a man can do to keep a roof over his head and food in his belly. It is not what you would call an easy life, but it is the one I have got, and I would not have it any other way." Pierce was silent for a spell, just looking deep into the flames. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with thought. "I have to say, I envy that. The freedom you have, the things you know how to do. I was raised on a ranch down in Texas, learning the cattle business, learning how to be a cowboy. It was a good life, good honest work, but there was always a path laid out for me, a part I was supposed to play. When my brother Daniel went north to find his own way, I was meant to stay behind and help run the place. But after he was gone, after Steele did what he did, I could not just let it be. My folks, they wanted me to let go of the anger, to remember Daniel would not want me to waste my life chasing after his killer. But how was I supposed to go back to working cattle when the man who shot my brother in the back was still out there robbing and killing folks?" Helena could hear the hurt in his voice, a tangle of guilt and pure old anger, and she knew that feeling all too well because she had felt something mighty similar when she lost her own parents. That feeling of being cut loose, of needing to find a new reason to get up in the morning. "Your brother would be proud that you are looking for justice," she said, her voice soft. "Not revenge, mind you, but justice. There is a world of difference." "Is there now?" Pierce looked over at her, and the firelight made his eyes look haunted. "Some days I am just not so sure. Some days I reckon I am just plain mad, just hurtin', and I have dressed it all up in fancy words like justice and duty. Anything to feel better about wanting to put a bullet right through Jacob Steele's chest." Helena set her coffee cup down and moved around the fire. She settled right next to Pierce, so close their shoulders were touching. It was a bold move, maybe even improper by polite folks' standards, but they were a long way from polite society, way up in these high mountains with killers on their trail and a hard winter breathing down their necks. "You listen here," she said, her voice firm. "The very fact that you are asking yourself these questions, that you are worried about the line between justice and revenge, that right there tells me you are a good man. A man who only wanted vengeance would not even care. He would not even ask the question. You came after Steele because he is a killer that has to be stopped, and yes, because he took your brother from you. Those two things can both be true." Pierce turned his head to look at her, and she was struck by how near he was. So near she could see little specks of blue in his gray eyes and a faint scar on his jaw she had not ever noticed before. "How did you get to be so wise?" he asked, and there was a tone in his voice that made her hold her breath. "I am not wise," she told him. "I am just stubborn, and I have learned that life is too short and way too hard to be wasted on what-ifs or second thoughts. We are here. We are doing this thing, and we are going to see it through to the end. Together." "Together," Pierce repeated, And then he did something that took her by complete surprise. He reached up and gently tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. His gloved fingers were so gentle against her cold cheek. The gesture was so tender, so private, that Helena felt a warmth spread all through her that had not a thing to do with the campfire. They just sat like that for a moment, close and quiet. And Helena could feel the weight of what might be hanging in the air between them. But then a sudden gust of wind blew a swirl of snow into their camp, and the moment was broken. They both pulled back, suddenly remembering where they were and what they were about. Pierce cleared his throat and got to his feet, mumbling something about checking on the horses. Helena let him go, her heart just hammering in her chest as she tried to make sense of what had just passed between them. She did not get much sleep that night, and she had a feeling Pierce did not either, though they took their turns on watch and only spoke when it was necessary to change shifts. By the time the sun came up, cold and bright, they were both worn out and stiff. But they broke camp like they had done it 100 times and were back on the trail inside of an hour. The tracks they followed took them higher and higher, into country where the snow was deep enough to make the going rough. The air got so thin that both the horses and the riders had to stop often just to catch their breath. But Helena could tell the men they were after were having a hard time of it too. Their trail showed they were tired, with places where a man had stumbled and spots where they had to stop and rest more and more. Whatever Steele and his boys were running to, they were not getting there easy. Time of it. "They are heading for an old mining camp," Helena said about noon, as they stopped on a ridge to look over the land ahead. "See there, how the trail follows that creek bed." There was silver mining up in these mountains back in the 1860s and 70s. Most of those camps are long gone now, but some of the buildings might still be standing. Steele is likely planning to hole up there for the winter, wait for the snow to pass in a solid shelter. Pierce frowned, using his hand to shield his eyes from the bright glare off the snow. "If they make it to that camp before we do, we have lost our edge. They will be dug in deep, and getting them out will be next to impossible, especially with just the two of us." "Then we have got to move faster," Helena said. "There is another way, a shortcut my father showed me a long time ago. It is dangerous. We would have to cross a path that could slide out from under us if we are not careful, but it will put us out ahead of Steele's bunch. We can get to that mining camp first." Pierce looked right at her, weighing the danger, and then he gave a firm nod. "You are the tracker. I am following your lead." They turned their horses and started the slow, careful climb toward the high pass. The wind up there was a monster strong enough to knock a body clean off their feet if they were not careful. The crusted, mean-spirited snow hid rocks and holes just waiting to snap a horse's leg. Helena rode point, feeling out every single step, her eyes scanning the high slopes for any hint of trouble. Pierce followed right in her tracks, putting all his faith in her, and she could feel the weight of that trust settle on her like a heavy blanket. They were about halfway over the pass when Helena heard it, a low growl that felt like it came from the guts of the mountain itself. She froze solid, throwing a hand up to signal Pierce to halt. For one awful second, they both stood stock still, hardly daring to breathe as the rumble rolled through the peaks all around them. Then, slow and easy, Helena started moving again, angling toward a jumble of rocks that looked like it might offer some cover if things went south. They nearly got there. They were 20 feet from the rocks, when the whole slope above them let loose with a roar like 1,000 stampeding longhorns. All at once the world turned into a storm of white, a wall of snow and ice tumbling down on them with a power that nothing could stop. Helena heard Pierce yell her name, felt Storm, her horse, lurch under her, and then she was running on pure nerve, kicking the horse forward, trying to outrun the avalanche to the slim safety of those rocks. She made it. Storm leaped the last few feet, and Helena launched herself out of the saddle, tumbling into the shelter of the rocks just as the avalanche thundered past. It was a solid wall of white death that filled the air with stinging ice, and a sound so loud it felt like the world was ending. She threw her arms over her head, hugged the cold stone, and sent a prayer up that Pierce had made it too. The quiet that came after the avalanche was almost as deafening as the roar had been. Helena's ears were ringing something fierce. Her body ached from where she hit the rocks, but she was alive. She pushed herself to her feet, coughing snow out of her lungs, and looked around in a panic for Pierce. Helena. His voice, rough and tight, came from her left. She spun around and saw him climbing out from behind another mess of rocks, caked in snow but looking to be in one piece. Relief washed over her so strong her knees nearly gave out. Before she could even think about it, she was running to him, stumbling through the deep snow the avalanche had dumped all over the pass. Pierce met her halfway, and then his arms were wrapped around her, and her arms were wrapped around him, and they were just holding on to each other with all their might, alive and together, and shaking from the pure terror of it all. "I thought I had lost you," Pierce said into her hair, his voice all raw. "I thought that snow had swallowed you whole." "I am here," Helena said, her face buried in his chest, feeling his heart pounding just as hard as her own. "I am here. We are both here. We made it." They held on to each other for a good long while, and Helena knew that something important had changed between them. They had crossed some kind of line you could not see, and there was no going back. When Pierce finally pulled back just enough to look down at her, his hands still resting on her shoulders, his face was serious and wide open. "Helena Cross," he said, "I have got to tell you something, and I'm going to tell you right now because we almost died, and life is just too short to be a coward. From the very first moment I saw you, the moment I watched you kneel down in that street and read those tracks like they were a story written just for you, I have been drawn to you. Your strength, your skill, your courage these past few days, riding with you, tracking with you. It has been the best week I have had since my brother Daniel died. You make me feel like maybe there is more to life than just getting even, something worth living for instead of just getting by. I know this is not the right time or the right place. I know we are out in the middle of nowhere hunting down killers, but I had to tell you. I had to let you know that you have come to mean more to me than I probably have any right to say." Helena's breath hitched in her throat. She just stared up at him, at this man who had somehow slipped past all her walls when she was not even looking. "Pierce," she said, her voice soft. "I feel it too. I have been trying my best not to, trying to keep this all business, telling myself we are just partners on a job. But the honest truth is, when I thought that avalanche might have gotten you, when I thought you might be gone, it scared me in a way nothing has scared me for years. You have become important to me. You have become someone I do not want to lose." Pierce's eyes searched her face. Then slowly, giving her all the time in the world to back away, he leaned down and kissed her. His lips were cold from the wind, but they were gentle, asking a question, and Helena answered by rising on her toes and kissing him right back. Her gloved hands got tangled in his big coat, pulling him in closer. The kiss was short, chaste by any real measure, but it felt like a promise, like the start of something new. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling in spite of the cold and the danger and the whole impossible mess they were in. "We should probably find the horses," Helena said, a little breathless, "and make sure they survive that mess. And then we need to get a move on because Steele is still out there, and those children might still be alive." Pierce let out a laugh, a sound of pure joy that bounced across the snow-covered pass. "You are absolutely right. But Helena, when this is all over, when we have caught Steele and brought those children back, if they can be brought back, I am going to court you properly. I am going to take you to a fine dinner in Central City, and I am going to ask your permission to come calling. We are going to do this the right way." "I would like that," Helena said, her smile getting even wider. "But first, we have got work to do." They found both their horses unharmed. The smart critters had bolted for safety at the first sound of the avalanche. Checking them over from head to hoof, they pushed on across the pass. The rest of the journey over was quiet, and by late afternoon they were heading down the other side. They followed a narrow trail that snaked through a thick pine forest, where the snow was not as deep and the wind did not bite so hard. Helena's bet on the shortcut had paid off. By the time the sun started to dip low, they had reached the old mining camp. It was a handful of worn-out buildings huddled around the entrance of a spent silver mine. The camp was deserted with no sign that anyone had been there recently. Helena felt a powerful sense of satisfaction, knowing they had beaten Steele's men to the spot. They will get here tomorrow, probably mid-morning if they keep up their pace, she said. She and Pierce stood in the long shadow of an old building, sizing up the ways into the camp. We have got tonight to get ready, to figure out how the two of us are going to handle 5 armed men. Pierce was quiet for a bit, his eyes scanning the lay of the land. Helena could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he made a plan. We have got the element of surprise on our side, he said. Finally. And we have got you, and you can shoot as straight as any man I have ever known. What we do not have is the legal power to arrest them, or the numbers to make them give up. So, we are going to have to be smart about this. They spent the next few hours getting set up, and Helena was mighty impressed with Pierce's way of thinking. He had clearly been in this kind of fix before, situations where being outnumbered meant you had to be clever instead of just tough. They picked the most defensible of the old shacks, one that gave them clear sight lines to all the ways in and had a back door in case they needed to make a quick exit. They gathered up deadfall and built obstacles that would force any attackers into kill zones. They checked and double-checked their guns, counted their bullets, and made sure their water and supplies were close at hand. When everything was done, when there was nothing left to do but wait, they built a small fire in the shelter of the building and planned to take turns standing watch through the night. Helena took the first shift, sitting by a window that looked out on the trail they figured Steele would use. Pierce stretched out near the fire, trying to catch some sleep. But about an hour into her watch, Helena heard him stir, and then he was sitting right there beside her, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the dark with her. "Could not sleep?" she asked in a low voice. "Did not want to," he admitted. "I would rather spend the time with you. We can talk if you want to talk, or just sit quiet if you would rather do that." Helena felt a warmth spread through her chest, and she shifted just a bit so their shoulders were touching. "Tell me about Texas," she said. "Tell me about your ranch and about your family. I want to know where you come from, who you were before all this happened." So Pierce told her, his voice low and steady in the quiet darkness. He told her about growing up on a cattle ranch, about learning to ride a horse before he could even walk right, about the never-ending work and the simple good things about that kind of life. He told her about his folks, hard-working and kind, who had built something from nothing and were proud of what they had made. He told her about Daniel, his older brother, who had been restless and full of big dreams, who had wanted more than ranch life could give him, and so he lit out for the north to make his own way. Pierce's voice was full of love and a deep-down ache when he spoke of his brother. Daniel, well, he was everything I was not. He had a smile that could charm a snake, while I was always the one with my boots on the ground. Folks just naturally took to him, wanted to be in his company. When he took off for Wyoming, I felt his absence every single day, but I was proud of him too. He was finally going after his own dream. And then one afternoon, about 6 months after he had gone, we got the telegram. It told of a bank robbery in Laramie, a man gunned down in the street. Daniel was dead at 26. The wire was short on details, but I started asking around and finally pieced together the whole sorry story. Jacob Steele and his crew hit the bank, and Daniel just happened to be passing by. Maybe he saw something, or maybe Steele just figured he did and shot him down right then and there. One minute my brother was living and breathing, and the next he was just gone. Killed by a fella who likely did not give him a second thought. Helena reached over and gave Pierce's hand a gentle squeeze. "I am so sorry," she said softly. "That is a heavy burden to carry, a hard way to lose someone you care about." "It was," Pierce nodded. "And it broke something in me. I could not go home to the ranch, not just act like the world had not turned upside down. So I gave my mother a kiss goodbye, shook my father's hand, and pointed my horse north. I have been on Steele's trail ever since, chasing him from Wyoming clean through Montana and now to this place. I got close more than once, but he always managed to give me the slip. But not this time. This time, I have got you with me. And for once, we are ahead of him instead of chasing his dust. This time, I might just get the justice Daniel deserves." "You will," Helena said, her voice sure and steady. "We will get it together." After that, they settled into a quiet comfort, watching the stars turn in the night sky through breaks in the clouds. Helena got to thinking how strange and winding life could be. Just 1 month back, she was all by herself, wandering from one town to the next with no real aim other than getting by. Now here she was, high up in the mountains in the dead of winter, fixing to face down a pack of killers. And somehow she had stumbled upon something she had not realized she was missing. She had found a reason, a partnership, and a feeling that was starting to warm her heart in a way that felt a whole lot like love. Dawn came up cold and bright, painting the peaks with shades of pink and gold, and Helena and Pierce got ready for whatever the day might bring. They had a quick bite to eat, gave their guns one last look, and then found their spots to wait. That waiting was the toughest part, the way time just seemed to crawl along as the sun climbed higher. The whole morning dragged on with no sign of Steele or his bunch. It was a little past 10 o'clock in the morning when Helena saw something moving down on the trail. She tapped Pierce on the arm and pointed. They both watched as 5 men on horseback came out of the tree line and started heading toward the old mining camp. Even from that far off, Helena could tell how they carried themselves. They were worn out, cold, and moving with that slow, dogged pace of men who have been riding hard and are just glad to be where they are going. "That's them," Pierce said, his voice quiet and tight with feeling. "The fella in the lead on the gray horse, that's Jacob Steele. I know him from the wanted posters, from all the descriptions I've heard." Helena took a good long look at the man. He was built solid, about average height with dark hair and a beard that might have been trimmed up nice once, but was now scraggly from too many days on the trail. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who was used to giving orders and having folks jump to obey. The 4 fellas with him seemed younger, rougher around the edges, the type of men who earned a living with their guns and likely did not ever lose a wink of sleep about it. "I don't see any children," Helena said, and her heart just sank. If they snatched the Hutchinson and Prescott kids, they sure aren't with them now. Pierce's jaw went hard as stone. "Which means they either left 'em somewhere or they killed 'em or sold 'em," Helena said, her voice low. It was a terrible thought, but a real one. There are people out there who'd pay good money for children, no questions asked. We've got to take at least one of these boys alive. Make him tell us what went down. The outlaws rode right on into camp, not expecting a lick of trouble. They swung down off their horses in front of one of the bigger shacks, the one that looked like it used to be the main bunkhouse when the mine was still running, and started to unpack their things. Helena could hear them talking and carrying on across the still, cold air. They were laughing and joking around, all relaxed now that they figured they were safe. Pierce and Helena held their ground until all 5 of the men were inside the building, and then they made their move. They had planned it all out real careful, going over it again and again during the night. They came in from 2 different directions, circling the building to cover the front door and the back way out, making sure nobody could bolt without being seen. Helena got herself set up behind a pile of old lumber that gave her a clean shot at the front door, while Pierce found a spot near the back. "Jacob Steele!" Pierce's voice boomed across the camp, loud and clear. "This is Pierce Northwood. You're wanted for murder back in Wyoming and for that raid on the trading post 3 days south of here. Come on out with your hands in the air, and we'll bring you in alive." For a second, there was nothing but stunned silence. Then all hell broke loose inside that building. Helena heard yelling, the sound of men scrambling for their guns, and then the crack of gunfire as bullets tore through the thin walls of that old shack. She kept her head down, staying patient, just waiting for the right moment. It came when one of the outlaws, younger than the rest and plain terrified, busted out the front door holding a rifle. Helena did not want to. Hollered and dropped his rifle, grabbing at his arm. Helena was up and moving in a flash, running over to kick the rifle out of his reach before putting her own gun on him. "You stay put," she commanded. And there must have been something in her voice that told him she meant business, because he dropped to his knees, his face all pale with pain and surprise. Another round of shots came from the back of the building, and Helena's heart jumped into her throat for a second, worried for Pierce. But then she heard his voice, strong and steady, telling someone to drop their weapon, and she could breathe again. The standoff went on for another 10 minutes, a tense and risky dance, with the men still inside firing a shot here and there and yelling threats. Pierce and Helena just held their positions, refusing to get pulled into a long, drawn-out gunfight. Finally, one of the outlaws decided to make a run for it, bolting out the back door and trying to scramble up the hill behind the camp. Pierce fired a warning shot that hit the snow just inches from the man's boots. The outlaw froze right in his tracks, then slowly put his hands up. "That's 2 down," Helena shouted over to Pierce. "3 left to go." What finally broke them was something neither of them had seen coming. A little wisp of smoke started curling up from the bunkhouse, and Helena felt a chill when she realized someone inside had either knocked over a lantern or set a fire on purpose. In just a few minutes, flames were chewing through that old, dry wood. The 3 men left inside had a choice to make, either burn up or give up. They chose to give up. First, one man came stumbling out, coughing with his hands held high, and then another followed him. Last of all, Jacob Steele himself walked out. His face was a mask of hard lines, and while his hands were up, his eyes were still burning with pure rage. Pierce stepped forward to cuff him, and Helena could see how tight and ready Pierce was as he stood before the man who killed his brother. "You've made a terrible mistake, Cowboy," Steele snarled, his voice raspy from the smoke. "You ain't got no authority here, no badge, no piece of paper. This is kidnapping, not arresting." "You're going back to Central City," Pierce said, his voice so calm it was scary. "You're going to stand trial for murder, for robbery, for every last bit of it. And you are going to tell us what you did with the Hutchinson and Prescott families, what you did with their children." A little something flickered in Steele's eyes. Maybe a hint of guilt, or maybe he was just trying to figure his odds. "The kids are alive," he said. "We left them at a trading post 2 days northeast of here. A woman there is looking after them. We took the family's money, but we didn't kill any children. We might be thieves, but we don't hurt kids." Helena felt a wave of relief so strong she nearly stumbled. The children were safe. After all the worrying and all the fear, the little ones were safe. The trip back to Central City took 5 long days, and it was one of the hardest things Helena had ever been through. They had 5 prisoners to handle, not nearly enough supplies, and a winter that seemed set on burying them all. But somehow they managed. They fought their way through snowstorms and freezing nights, stretched their food as thin as they could, and kept a close eye on the outlaws, who tried to escape a few times without much real effort. Pierce was a different man on that ride back, more quiet and closed off. He would just stare at Jacob Steele for hours, and Helena could see the war he was fighting inside himself, the need for revenge clashing with the good man he truly was. She stayed right by his side, giving him silent support, letting him know with her presence that he was not alone in this, that he did not have to carry that heavy load all by himself. They stopped at the trading post Steele had mentioned and found the Hutchinson and Prescott children, alive and doing all right. They were being looked after by a tough old woman named Martha, who had clearly been scared out of her wits about what might happen if she did not do what the outlaws said. The reunion with the children and telling them the heartbreaking news that their parents had not made it was tough, but at least the little ones were safe. At least they would get a chance to live. When they finally rode into Central City with their prisoners and the rescued children, it seemed like the whole town turned out to see them. The marshal took custody of Steele and his men, and folks made arrangements to put the children with families who could take care of them. Helena and Pierce gave their statements, handed over the evidence they had collected, and then, bone-tired and wrung out, they finally got a chance to rest. Pierce found her that evening at the boarding house where she was staying. He knocked softly on her door and waited for her to answer. When she opened the door, he was just standing there, scrubbed clean and freshly shaved. He looked more unsure of himself than she had ever seen him, and her heart just about burst with warmth. Pierce spoke right away, wasting no time. "I know I promised to court you the right way," he said, "and I am fixin' to do just that. But I have to get this off my chest before another second goes by." He looked her square in the eye. "Helena Cross, you are the toughest, smartest, and most incredible woman I have ever had the privilege to know. Riding alongside you this winter, hunting down those men, and facing killers and snowslides and every other thing that tried to kill us. Well, that has been the biggest honor of my entire life. You are the one who saved those children. You helped me see justice done for my brother's murder, and somewhere on that long trail, you saved me too. You showed me that there is more to this world than just getting even, that there is more to being alive than just drawing breath. I am falling in love with you, Helena, and it was important to me that you knew it. Helena could feel the tears welling up in her eyes. They were tears of pure happiness and relief, a flood of emotion she could not hold back. She reached out, took Pierce by the hand, and pulled him inside her room, closing the door firm behind him. "I am falling in love with you, too," she managed to say, her voice thick with feeling. "You are a decent man." "Pierce Northwood, one of the finest I have ever met. You are strong and courageous and full of honor, and you look at me as an equal, a true partner. I have walked a lonely road for so much of my life, and I honestly thought that was how I liked it. But then you came along, and suddenly being alone does not hold a candle to the thought of being together." Pierce gathered her up in his arms and held her tight. For a long while they just stood there like that, sharing the same air, feeling the simple comfort of being alive, safe, and in each other's company. When his lips finally met hers, it was nothing like that hurried, desperate kiss up on the mountain. This one was slow and gentle and full of promise. It was a kiss that spoke of new beginnings and long futures, of all the sunrises they would share. In the months that followed, Pierce was true to his word. He courted Helena properly. He took her out for suppers and to town dances. They strolled together down the main streets of Central City, and he introduced her to folks as his girl, with a pride in his voice that no one could miss. The townspeople welcomed her, maybe because she had a hand in taking down Jacob Steele's whole outfit, or maybe because anyone with two good eyes could see that she and Pierce belonged together. The trial for Jacob Steele was held in February, where both Helena and Pierce stood up and told their story. The jury found Steele guilty of murder, robbery, and kidnapping on several counts, and the judge sentenced him to hang. Pierce was there for the execution, standing quiet and still while the man who took his brother's life paid the final price. After it was all over, he seemed lighter, like a heavy stone he had been carrying for months had finally been set down. Spring rushed into the mountains with melting snow and little green sprouts pushing through the last bits of white, and it brought changes with it. Pierce asked Helena to marry him on a hillside that looked out over Central City. With the whole wide state of Colorado stretched out before them, she said yes without a moment's thought. They got married in April. It was a simple affair at the little church in town, but it felt like half of Central City was there to see it. Martha from the trading post stood up as Helena's witness. Pierce had already sold his family's ranch back in Texas and used that money to buy a spread just outside of town. It was good grazing land with plenty of water and enough cover to protect the animals from the worst of the winter, blizzards. He and Helena built their life right there. They raised cattle and bred horses, and Helena kept taking on tracking jobs whenever they came her way. She was just too skilled at it and had too much passion for it to ever give it up for good. Pierce never once asked her to stop. He understood that her talent was a part of her, and he loved every single part of the woman she was, not just the pieces that fit nicely into the role of a rancher's wife. Their first baby was born the next winter, a strong, healthy boy they named Daniel, after Pierce's brother. Helena was in labor all through the night with a midwife from town to help, and Pierce wore a path in the floor outside, until Martha finally had mercy on him and let him inside to hold his wife's hand. When little Daniel finally made his appearance all red and squalling, Pierce cried tears of pure joy. He held his son with such a gentle touch that Helena fell in love with him all over again. Life was not always a smooth ride. Some winters were brutal and some summers were bone dry. Cattle would get sick, horses would go lame, and money would get tight. They faced the 1,000 little troubles that come with running a ranch. But Helena and Pierce met every challenge side by side as partners, and they built something that was solid and meant to last. They had 2 more children in the following years, a little girl they named Rose. and another boy they called James. The ranch did well, growing from a humble start into one of the most successful spreads in the whole region. Pierce earned himself a reputation as a fair and honest man, the kind of person you could count on. Helena made a name for herself too, and not just for her tracking. She became known as a problem solver, someone who could find a lost herd or a missing person. A woman who could read the land in a way that seemed like magic to folks who did not understand the skill behind it. The Hutchinson and Prescott children, the very ones they had rescued that winter, grew up right there in Central City with good families who cherished them. Helena and Pierce kept in touch with them through the years. It gave them both a deep sense of peace to watch those children grow up strong, knowing their hard ride into the mountains had made all the difference. Sometimes on cold winter nights with the wind howling outside and the fire crackling in the fireplace, Helena would let her mind wander back to that December day. She would remember kneeling in the snow, studying the tracks when Pierce had come up behind her and asked for her help. She would think about the thunder of the avalanche, about their kiss on the mountain, about the moment they stood against killers together and walked away. Then she would look across the warm room at Pierce. Maybe he would be playing with one of the children, or reading a book, or just staring into the flames. A powerful feeling of gratitude would wash over her for the way her life had turned out. Pierce would sometimes catch her looking at him, and he would break into a smile, that same one that had completely changed his serious face that first night up in the mountains. And in that moment, she would know he was thinking the exact same thing, that they had found one another against all the odds, that they had built something real and true, that they had taken the hard, broken pieces of their pasts and pieced them together into something truly beautiful. As the years rolled by, the ranch became more than a business. It turned into a true home, a place where friends and neighbors would gather, a symbol of what people could build with hard work and a strong partnership. Pierce taught their children how to ride and rope, passing down the same values his own folks had taught him. Helena taught them how to track, to read the signs of the land and to understand the natural world and their own place within it. Together, they raised children who were strong, capable, and kind, children who knew their own value and respected the value of others. When Daniel was 10, Rose was 8, and James was 6 years old, a young woman showed up at the ranch looking for work. Her name was Sarah Prescott, and she was one of the children they had pulled from that winter nightmare all those years ago. She was 18 now, sharp as a tack and not afraid of hard work, and she wanted to learn the ranching life. Helena and Pierce took her in without a second thought. They gave her a job and a room, and watching her grow and learn filled them both with a deep sense of things coming full circle. Sarah stayed on for 3 years, soaking up everything she could. When she finally moved on, it was to start her own small ranch with a young man she had met in town. At her wedding, she stood up and thanked Helena and Pierce in front of everyone, telling the whole crowd that they had saved her life, not once, but twice. The first time was when she was just a little girl, and the second was when they gave her the skills and the confidence she needed to build her own future. During her speech, Pierce reached over and took Helena's hand. Speech, then squeezed it real gentle, and she squeezed right back. Both of them were lost in the memory of that hard winter ride, the bone-deep cold and the ever-present danger. They felt a powerful gratitude that they had taken that chance, that they had pointed their horses toward the mountains together, when turning back would have been the easiest thing in the world. The years kept rolling on, marked by the turning of the seasons, by new life and sad goodbyes, by dry spells and years of plenty, and by all the simple moments that stitch a life together. Daniel grew into a strong and thoughtful young man, a mirror of his father, but with his mother's special way of understanding the land. He started taking on more of the ranch work as Pierce got older, and he handled it with a quiet skill that filled his folks with pride. Rose was spirited and stood on her own 2 feet with her mother's aim with a rifle and her father's strong sense of what was right. She chose to be a school teacher, set on giving an education to the children in Central City and the ranches all around. James was the charmer, the one with a quick laugh who never met a stranger. And he eventually got into business, opening a supply store in town that had everything a rancher could ever want. Helena and Pierce grew old side by side, their hair turning to silver, their faces mapping the years, their bodies showing the honest wear of a life lived with all their might. But they were still a team, still the very same people who rode into those mountains fueled by nothing but faith and grit. They still held hands when the evening came, still shared a goodnight kiss, and still looked at each other with a love and respect that only comes from knowing someone clear through to their soul. On the day they had been married for 20 years, Pierce took Helena back to the spot where he had asked her to be his wife, that hillside with a view of Central City. It was spring once more. The mountains were dressed in green and buzzing with life, and they sat there together, watching the sun dip behind the peaks they had crossed all that time ago. "Do you ever wish you had done different?" Pierce asked in a low voice. "Riding with me that winter, chancing it all, nearly getting buried by a wall of snow and staring down Steele and his crew." Helena gave it some real thought because Pierce was owed a real answer. Then she shook her head. "Not for a single second," she said, her voice sure. "That ride changed my whole world. It gave me everything I have right now. You, our children, this ranch, this life. Before you, I was just drifting along, getting by, but not truly living. You gave me a reason, a partner, and a love I never knew. So no, I do not regret a thing. I would do it all over again in the blink of an eye." Pierce gathered her in close, kissing the crown of her head. "You could read a trail better than any scout I ever met," he said, his words echoing what he had told her so long ago. "And you could love better than any woman I ever dreamed of. Thank you, Helena. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to ride with me that winter. Thank you for being my partner, my wife, and my dearest friend. Thank you for building all of this with me." Helena turned in his embrace and gave him a proper kiss, a deep one filled with all the love and fire of 20 years together. "Thank you for asking," she whispered against his mouth. "Thank you for truly seeing me, for knowing my worth, and for loving me just the way I am." They stayed there until the night was complete, holding on to each other. They were two people who had found one another when the odds were stacked against them and had built something that would endure long after they were gone. Down below, the lights of Central City started to sparkle in the growing dark. And somewhere in those lights were their children, their friends, and their whole community. They had built a legacy, not just of land and cattle, but of lives they had touched and wrongs they had righted, of a love given without condition and returned in full. As they finally got to their feet to head for home, Pierce took Helena's hand, and they walked down that hillside together, just like they had walked through their whole life together, as partners, as equals, as two souls who had discovered in each other everything they had been searching for, and more than they had ever dared to hope for. The ranch kept on prospering with Daniel at the helm, and in time, his own children, the grandchildren of Pierce and Helena, began to learn the business, from mending fences to rounding up strays. The circle of life continued, with each generation building on the foundation of the one before. And at the very heart of it all was the story of two people who had ridden into the mountains in the heart of winter and came out on the other side with their lives, their honor, and their love, all in one piece. Helena lived long enough to see her grandchildren become adults, to see the ranch that she and Pierce had poured their souls into become one of the most respected outfits in all of Colorado. She lived to see Central City change from a rough-and-tumble mining town into a true community, with schools and churches and laws that people actually followed. And through every bit of it, she had Pierce right there with her, her partner in the truest sense of the word, the man who had recognized her skills and valued them, who had asked her to be his riding partner, and then spent the rest of his days feeling like the luckiest man alive because she said yes. When Pierce passed on in his sleep at the age of 72, with Helena holding his hand and their children all around, it was a peaceful and fitting end to a long and good life. Helena mourned him with all her heart. the way any woman would mourn the passing of the great love of her life. But she had no regrets. She had shared nearly 30 years with him, had built a life and a family with him, and had known a love so deep and true that many folks never get to experience. She lived on for another 5 years after Pierce was gone, staying on the ranch, giving Daniel advice when he asked for it, but mostly just letting him handle things his own way. She still took on a tracking job now and then when somebody needed something found, because old skills do not just fade away, and she could still read sign better than most men half her age. And she told stories to her grandchildren, tales about their grandfather, about the winter they rode into the mountains together, about snowslides and outlaws and finding love in the most unexpected of places. When Helena finally passed on quietly in her sleep one spring morning, with the windows open and the smell of pine and wildflowers drifting in, her family grieved, but they also celebrated. They celebrated a life lived to the fullest, a woman who was remarkable in every way, who had bucked expectations and blazed her own trail and loved with a powerful spirit. They laid her to rest next to Pierce on the hillside that looked out over the ranch. And if you go there today, you can still see the two headstones standing together, marking the place where two people who found each other in the wild built something that would last. The ranch is still there, run now by the great-great-grandchildren of Pierce and Helena, and the story of how it all started has become the stuff of family legend. They tell the story of Helena Cross, who could track better than any scout you ever heard of, and Pierce Northwood, the cowboy who asked her to ride with him one winter and then spent the rest of his days thanking his lucky stars that she agreed to it. They tell of surviving an avalanche, of bringing killers to justice, of saving children, and of a love that was stronger than anything that stood in its way. And sometimes on cold winter nights when the wind howls down from the mountains and the snow is piled high, folks will swear they can see two figures on horseback riding the high trails. It is a man and a woman, side by side, partners even beyond this life, forever tracking, forever together, forever young and strong and in love. Of course, it is just a story, the kind of sweet tale that always grows up around a true and great love. But the people who tell it always have a smile on their face and a warmth in their heart, because the story of Pierce and Helena is a reminder of what can happen when two people put their complete trust in each other, when they look danger in the eye together, when they build something real out of nothing but faith, courage, and love. The legacy they left was more than just land or cattle or even children, though all of that was mighty important. Their real legacy was the example they set, the proof that a partnership of equals could build something stronger than either person could on their own. That love could get through hardship and danger and time itself. Time. It showed that two folks from worlds apart could come together and make a life that meant something. When all was said and done, that is what folks talked about when they mentioned Pierce Northwood and Helena Cross. It was not the fine points of that winter journey, or the names of the bad men they brought in, or the little ones they rescued. It was the look in their eyes, even after years and years together, a look of pure respect and deep affection, and a love that never once wavered. Folks remembered how they were true partners, how they stood shoulder to shoulder as equals. They remembered the simple truth that these two souls picked each other and went on picking each other every single morning for all their days. That was the tale that was handed down. It got woven into the very soul of Central City and all the ranches around it. It gave young folks a reason to believe in love, in partnership, and in the chance to build something that would stand the test of time. And the heart of it all was simple. Two people crossed paths, saw a special spark in one another, took a mighty gamble by riding into harm's way, and came through it all holding something priceless, something you just do not find every day, something worth every bit of the fight. Them mountains are still standing, timeless and steady, with their white tops shining in the sun. And somewhere up in those hills are the very trails that Pierce and Helena rode. The pass where they made it through a wall of snow. The mining camp where they stared down men with murder in their eyes. The land itself holds their memory, if a piece of land can do such a thing. And the people, well, the people sure do remember. They keep that story breathing from one generation to the next. Because when you get right down to it, That is the only thing that truly counts. It is not about how much money you stack up or what kind of title you have. It is not about the size of your herd or the spread of your ranch. It is about the love you put out into the world and the love you got back, the folks whose lives you made a little better, the mark you left. Pierce and Helena knew that in their bones. They lived by it, and they left something behind that was worth more than any deed or title. They left folks with the solid proof that love could beat anything, that two equal partners could work wonders, that a man and a woman with total trust could look any trouble in the face and come out on top. They left behind kids and grandkids who held those same beliefs, who built on what they started, and who knew that real strength is not about standing by yourself, but about standing with someone you love. But the most important thing they left behind was their story. A story that was beautiful and sad and full of hope all at the same time. It was about a woman who could read the land better than any man who called himself a scout. And it was about a cowboy who was smart enough to see her talent and brave enough to ask her to join him for a long winter ride. It was a story of how that one simple question, that one choice to put their faith in each other, turned into a whole lifetime of love and partnership and happiness. It was a tale that just had to be told, had to be remembered, had to be handed down to the ones who came after, to show them what could happen when two strong hearts met out in the wild and figured out that being together was a whole lot better than being apart. And you knew that story would keep on living, long after their own family line had ended, long after their ranch house had turned back into prairie dust. Because some stories are just too strong to ever fade. They mean too much to ever be forgotten. They are too beautiful to just let go. The story of Pierce Northwood and Helena Cross was exactly that kind of story. And it will ring out for years to come, a true testament to what love can do, to the strength you find in a partner, and to the everlasting truth that sometimes the biggest journey of your life starts with just a handful of words. Will you ride with me this winter? And Helena, she said yes. With that one little word, with that single choice, she kicked off a series of events that would change everything, not just for her, but for more people than she could ever count. She and Pierce rode up into those mountains side by side, and they came back down with justice done, children safe, and a love that would see them through all their years. That was their story, and it was a darn good one. The kind of tale meant for telling around a crackling fire when the winter wind howls. The kind of tale that could make a person believe in love all over again. The kind of tale that reminded every soul who listened that every now and then, those old stories about happy endings could actually happen. Even out in the rough and tumble West, even in the biting cold of winter, even when it seemed like everything was against you. All it took was a little bit of grit, a true partner, and someone who would ride right alongside you into whatever trouble was waiting down the trail. Pierce and Helena had that with each other, and it made all the difference in the world.